Hello everyone, I'm Mitsuhone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. I apologize for my voice being a little bit off. I have a cold, but, I'm going to power through this anyway. This week we're looking at another discontinued keyword ability, this being one of those most recently abandoned, Regenerate. Regenerate was an ability that indicated that a creature was difficult to kill, capable of coming back from most anything, and it primarily appeared on green and black cards, and it allowed creatures, if you paid a cost, to just survive. Wizards eventually discontinued the ability and chose to replace it with Indestructible. While Indestructible was, of course, introduced years before Regenerate was discontinued in 2016, Indestructible came to occupy the same space in both flavor and gameplay since then. It seems we won't ever see Regenerate again, so let's look at the 10 cards that could regenerate that did the most in Magic's competitive history. Cards receive points on this list depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8s they've received, with the Pro Tour Top 8 worth twice as much as a Grand Prix Top 8. The cards in this list are arranged numbers 10 through 1, with the highest score being found at number 1. I count Legacy and Vintage Championship events as Pro Tour Top 8s as well, so those formats are reflected in the scores of the cards. So let's get started at number 10 with Spiritmonger, who, in his time, was one of the most pushed creatures ever. A 5-mana 6/6 who can regenerate and gain +1/+1 counters and change colors. That part's kind of irrelevant, but hey, he showed up in Standard first in versions of Fires of Yavimaya that splashed black for the Spiritmonger, but he saw the most play in Extended, being the central aspect of a black-green deck that came to be known as the Rock, which was basically a black-green mid-range deck, running great black removal and large green creatures to close out the game. The Spiritmonger hasn't seen play anywhere since 2002, but there was a time when he was one of the scariest creatures you'd have to deal with. Skeletal Vampire is at number 9, and it's kind of a weird card. Don't get me wrong, it's pretty good. 6 mana for 5/5 worth of flying, the ability to make more bat tokens, and the ability to use those bat tokens to regenerate is pretty good, but it definitely feels more like a limited bomb than a constructed playable. What makes the Vampire really odd is that it was a fairly dominant card in Ravnica Block Constructed. It put up 6 Pro Tour Top 8s at a single Pro Tour in the format in 2006, and that despite his dominance there, which is usually a good sign for at least some action in Standard, he never saw play again, getting all 12 points at this one Pro Tour in Block Constructed. Good news for the Skeleton, though, with Regeneration no longer being printed on new cards, it seems unlikely he ever gets kicked off this list. At number 8, we have Inkling Eyes, Servant of Oni, a super powerful card packing the ninjutsu ability that allowed her to just come in out of nowhere and not only hit your opponent for 5, but also steal a creature from their graveyard. She also happens to have Regenerate, as if she wasn't already a big enough problem. Inkling Eyes did well in block, like Skeletal Vampire, showing up in all manner of decks running black, including in the sideboard of a combo deck and in a Snake Tribal deck, showing you how strong she is since neither of those are places where you'd immediately think to see her. But unlike the Skeleton, she saw play in Standard too, putting up 3 top 8s in that format as well, all in Gifts Ungiven based control decks. At number 7, we have Gogari Grave Troll, a card that would have been much higher if not for all the banning that has happened to him. The Grave Troll is basically the best non-Life from the Loam card with Dredge there is, and serves as both a way to fill your yard and as a potential win condition in Dredge decks, where he's obviously going to get quite large. Certainly doesn't hurt that he can regenerate by removing +1/+1 counters either. The Troll is one of those funny cards that wasn't really all that good in block or Standard, but has been a powerhouse in non-rotating formats where dumping stuff in the graveyard can more effectively be abused. Extended is where he first rose to power, showing up in decks calling themselves Dredge, and others that call themselves Icarid after another powerful creature in the Dredge deck that could abuse all the cards a Troll was getting into your graveyard. The Troll was such a problem that when Extended ended in 2011 and was replaced with Modern, it was on the initial ban list, even though Icarid wasn't legal in the format, showing you how powerful Wizards felt he was. The Troll continued to be a linchpin in Dredge decks, though, but in Legacy and Vintage. In January of 2015, Wizards unbanned Golgari Grave Troll in Modern, and for 2 years, the Troll was legal there. While he only put up 2 Grand Prix Top 8s in the format, it was clear that Dredge was too powerful with the Troll, as it was dominating events on Magic Online and in other places, and the poor guy got banned again out of Modern in January of 2017. Dredge hasn't been as dominant in the Eternal formats lately either, though Dredge is still around and seems like a real possibility to put up top 8s in those formats at some point. It just hasn't happened since 2006. At number 6, we have Nightscape Familiar. A 2-mana 1/1 who can regenerate isn't enough to see play. I mean, look at Dredge Skeletons. But this guy managed to find his way into control decks, especially black-blue ones, where he can make the counter spells and removal spells cheaper, while also providing a source of damage, albeit not a lot of it. The primary win condition of these blue-black control decks was usually Psychotog, and it helped that the Familiar made him cost less too. Standard alongside Psychotog is where he saw most of his play, and he and Psychotog dominated Worlds in 2002, taking 6 of the top 8 slots there. The Psychotog deck continued after that, but it stopped running Nightscape Familiar and began appearing in dredge lists and extended, and Nightscape Familiar hasn't done anything since then. Still, a pretty sweet card to run in any EDH deck that overlaps with his colors, and obviously had a pretty good run in Standard when he had the chance. At number 5, we have Rakshasa Death Dealer, who can not only regenerate, but can also pump its power. This made it a pretty potent 2-drop in the Standard of its day, since it stayed relevant into the later game. It mostly showed up in Abzan decks, which were of course one of the more powerful decks in the format, thanks to cards like Death Dealer, Fleecemane Lion, Abzan Charm, and of course Siege Rhino. Abzan had several dominant showings, and as a result, so did the Death Dealer. 3 top 8s at Grand Prix LA in 2014, 3 at Grand Prix Manila in 2015, 4 at Seville, 4 at Miami, and you get the point. For all of its successes since rotating out of Standard, it hasn't seen any play, and I don't think it ever will. There's just better 2-drops in non-rotating formats. At number 4, we have River Boa, a pretty good representative of power creep in Magic, since today, this creature wouldn't be all that impressive, but from 1997 to 2003, it put up some pretty good numbers. The River Boa was actually reprinted a few times after its initial printing in Visions, first in 6th edition and then in Zendikar. After its original printing, it saw a little play in Standard, picking up a Pro Tour top 8 at Worlds in 1997 in the mono-green aggro deck, which are often called Stompy. After it was reprinted a couple of years later, though, it saw even more success, which included 3 Pro Tour top 8s at Worlds in 99 in Stompy decks and 4 Pro Tour top 8s at Pro Tour Chicago in 2000, this time in Fires of Yavimaya decks, which we've mentioned earlier in this video, which were red-green aggro decks running this powerful enchantment. Worth noting that this card was actually in main boards as a full 4 of because it was aggressive enough even without Island Walk, thanks to being difficult to kill and having 2 power. This is also true in Extended, where it picked up 2 Pro Tour top 8s and 5 Grand Prix top 8s, again in aggressive green decks. Despite being legal in Modern, River Boa has been a victim of power creep, and there are far better 2-drops in green these days. At number 3, we have Loxodon Hierarch, who can't actually regenerate himself, but can regenerate all of his buddies. It came out in Ravnica, which was sort of when Wizards really pushed creatures hard for the first time, like collectively, after spells had been more powerful than creatures for about a decade. Loxodon Hierarch at the time felt really pushed. A 4-mana 4/4 with all kinds of upside was great, and it was one of the best creatures from Ravnica. I think that if this creature were reprinted in the Standard of today, it would actually still be a card people wanted to play, which is not something that is true of all creatures that are more than 10 years old. The life gain and the regeneration are both pretty powerful effects to have on a 4/4. At Pro Tour Charleston in 2006, a block constructed Pro Tour, the Loxodon appeared 3 times in the top 8. It also did incredibly well in Standard, putting up 5 top 8s at Worlds in 2005. Primarily appearing in a deck that made a bunch of Saproling tokens and used Glare of Subdual to lock down the opponent. Meanwhile, the Hierarch could bash for a turn. It made a big impact on Extended too, becoming the top curve of Zoo decks when it was first printed, but also appearing in Rock decks, Doran the Siege Tower decks, and Life from the Loam. It was just a quality card in all those decks because it provided you with a big beater who also brought you time with life gain, and in the aggressive decks it could sacrifice itself to save the rest of your creatures from board sweepers. The Hierarch also picked up 1 Grand Prix top 8 at a Legacy Pro Tour, indicating just how strong of a creature it was at the time. After Extended ended in 2011, the Hierarch has not done much, though in 2014 it did manage to pick up a Grand Prix top 8 in a Birthing Pod deck at a Modern Grand Prix. It hasn't done anything since then, and while it was ultra powerful at the time, the Hierarch has since been surpassed by even more powerful creatures, and probably won't see play unless he gets a standard legal reprint. At number 2, we have Gogari Charm. Like all charms, it has 3 separate abilities. It can give -1/-1 to the board, it can destroy enchantments, and what makes it make this list, it can regenerate your whole board. The flexibility of charms makes them incredibly good sideboard cards, since there's only 1 card taking up 1 slot, but in Gogari Charm's example, it is good against small creature aggro decks, decks running enchantments, and decks running board sweepers, and that's a pretty big percentage of decks. Gogari Charm is one of the most successful charms too. Top 10 charms or modal cards seems like a good future video. But anyway, it has seen play in all formats that aren't vintage. In Standard, it showed up primarily in Jund decks, but also in some Devotion decks and in Golgari Control and Aggro. In Modern, it has seen play sporadically. It was part of Gisland Given decks in the early days of the format, then more recently in Jund, and most recently in Abzan. In Legacy, it has seen play in the Jund decks of that format, but also in 4-Color Delver and Shardless Bug. It continues to see play in both Legacy and Modern, having put up Grand Prix top 8s in those formats this year, so it will continue to improve its score. However, I'm not sure it will ever catch the number 1 on this list, which is Thrun the Last Troll, who we just saw make an appearance a few weeks ago on the top 10 Hexproof list. Most creatures with Hexproof give control decks nightmares. Thrun the Last Troll adds to that by also not being able to be countered, and what's important for us in this list, he can also regenerate, so this troll is hard to destroy. He can't die in combat, he can't die to destroy effects, He can't die to many things. Only board sweeping, exile, or -X effects, and edict effects can take him down if his controller has the mana to regenerate him. Thrun's hardiness has led to him seeing a lot of play as his 4/4 body, regeneration, ability to not be countered, and hexproof all combine to make one of the most difficult to deal with creatures in the game. He first saw play at Pro Tour Nagoya in 2011, a block Pro Tour in a 4-color control deck. Thrun also saw a lot of play in Standard though, and this included both mainboard and sideboard play. He showed up in the mainboard of a variety of decks. This included aggro decks like green-white aggro and green-red aggro, but also included Temur Control, Kessig Titan, and Birthing Pod. If he wasn't in the mainboard of a deck with green in it, he was probably in the sideboard. This included decks like Valakut Ramp, Vengevine, and mono green aggro. Thrun also sees play in Modern, showing up in the mainboard of Jund and Birthing Pod and in the sideboard of Zoo decks. He's even found his way into some legacy decks, primarily the various incarnations of Maverick, though he hasn't seen play there since 2014. He hasn't seen play in any format since 2016. In Modern, one of the decks that played him the most got banned in 2014, Birthing Pod, and he stopped seeing play in Jund decks because control decks aren't as prevalent in Modern right now as they once were, though you can bet if there's a resurgence of control in the metagame, Thrun will find his way back into the top 8s. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you see more MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. This video is sponsored by 5colorcombo.com. You can use my discount code NEETSAHONE5 there to get a 5% discount in their store. Thanks for watching.